变化发生
significant
历史变
changes in
化，
China's response to
共
climate
建
change,
公平合理、合作
and
共赢
building
的
a fair and
全球气候
rational
治理体系。
global climate governance system
白
for
皮书
win-win
以
results.
中、英、
It
法、
will be
俄、
translated into
德、
English,
西、
French, German,
阿、日
Spanish,
等8个语
Arabic,
种发布，
and
由
Japanese,
人民出版社、外
and
文出
will
版社
be
分别
published
出
by
版，
the People's
在全国新华
Press
书店
and
发行。
Foreign Languages Press.
为了帮助大家更好、
To
更
help you
准
have
确地
a
了解
better
白皮
and
书的
more
情况，
accurate
今天
understanding
的发布
of
会，我们
the
邀请
White
到
Paper,
生态
today we
环
have
境
the
部
honor
副
to
部长
have
叶明先生，
Vice Minister Ye Min of Ecology and
生态环境
Environment
部应对气候变化司负责人孙真先生，
and the leader of the
请他们
Department
向大家介
of
绍有关情
Climate
况，并回
Response
答大家
of
感
the
兴趣的问
Ministry
题。
of Ecology and
下
Environment.
面先
He
请
will
叶明先生做情况
take
介
your
绍。
questions on climate change.
好，谢谢
Minister Ye,
主
please.
持人。女士们、先生们，
Thank you, moderator.
各位媒体
Ladies and
朋友们，
gentlemen, friends
大家下午
from
好。
the media, good afternoon.
欢迎大家出席
Welcome
中国应
to
对气候变化
the
政策与行动
press
白
conference
皮
on
书
the
的
release
新闻发
of the
布会。
white paper responding to
在这里呢，
climate change policies
首
and
先
actions of
感
China.
谢
Let me
媒
take
体
this
朋友们
opportunity
长期以来
to thank
对中国应
all
对气候变化工
friends
作
from the
的
media
关心
for the
和支
long-term
持。
support and care for China's
气候变
response
化
to climate
是
change.
全人类面临
Climate
的
change
严
is
峻
a
挑
serious
战，
challenge facing
需
all
要世界各
mankind.
国
It
携手努力，
requires all
同舟
countries in
共
the
济，
world to work together
共同应
and
对。
help each other out to cope
应对
with
气
it
候变化
together.
事关中华民
Addressing
族
climate
永续发
change
展，
has a bearing
事关
on
人
the
类前途
sustainable
命运。
development of the Chinese
作
nation
为
and
气
the
候行
future
动的
destiny
积
of
极
all
推动者
mankind.
和
As an
坚
active
定践行
promoter
者，
and firm
中
practitioner
国
of
始终
climate
高度
change,
重视
climate
应
action,
对气候变化
China
工
has
作，
always attached great importance to
将
climate
应对
change
气候
and
变化
regards climate
作为
change
生
as
态
an
文明
important
建设
part
的
of the
重要抓手，
advancement of ecological
作为
civilization
推动发展方式转变、
and as an
实
important
现
way to
可持
promote
续
the
发展的
transformation
重
of
要途径。
development mode and achieve sustainable
多年以
development.
来，
Over the
我
years,
们坚持以习近平生
we
态
have
文明
stayed
思想为
committed
指
to
导，
the guidance of Xi
坚
Jinping
定实
thought
施
on
积极
ecological
应对气候变
civilization
化
and
国家
firmly
战略，
implemented the national
取
strategy
得
to
了显著
actively
成效。
respond to climate change and achieved
在
remarkable
全面
results.
总结应对气
On the
候变化
basis
工
of
作的基础上，
comprehensively reviewing the work
我
of
们
addressing
编
climate
制了
change, we
中国
organized
应
the
对气候变化
compilation
的
of
政
the
策
white
与行
paper
动白皮书。
responding to climate change policies and
这也是
actions.
我国
This is
继
also the second
2011
time
年以
since
来
2011
第
that
二次
China has issued
从
a
国家
white
层面
paper
对外
on
发布
China's response to climate
中国
change from
应对
the
气候变化
national
白皮
level.
书。白皮书的内容
The
包
white
括
paper includes
中国应对气候变化
China's
新
new
理念，
concept of addressing climate
实施积
change,
极
the
应对气候变
implementation
化
of a
国家
national
战略，
strategy to actively
中
address
国应
climate
对气候
change,
变
the
化发
historic
生历
changes
史
in
变化，
China's response to
以及
climate change,
共建
and
公平
the
合理、
establishment
合
of
作
a
共赢
fair,
的全
rational,
球
and
气候
win-win
治理
global
体
climate
系四
governance
个方面。
system,
刚才主持人也提到，
as was mentioned by the
那么
moderator.
全面阐述了
It
党
elaborates
的
on
18大以
China's
来，
vision and policy
特别
actions
是
in
13个
addressing
期
climate
间，
change since the
我国应对
18th
气候变化
CPC
工作
National
的
Congress,
思想理
especially
念
during the
和政策
13th
行动，
five-year plan period,
充分展示了我
showcases the
国应对
progress
气候变化的进展与成效，
and
以
effects,
及
as well as
为全球
China's
气候治理
outstanding
所做出的
contributions to
突出贡
global
献，
climate governance.
系统反映了我国
It
应对
reflects
气候变
China's
化的主张。
propositions, wisdom,
智
and
慧
plans to
和
deal
方案。
with climate change
18大以
systematically.
来，中国持续深入
Since the
推
18th
进应对气候
CPC
变化
National
工作，
Congress, China has
实现了
continued
碳排
to
放
deepen
程度
its efforts
显
to
著下
address
降，
climate change, achieving a
能源
significant
产业
reduction
结
in
构
carbon
持续
emission
优化，
intensity, continuous
低碳发展
optimization of
机
energy
制
and
不断完
industrial
善，
structure, continuous
全国碳
improvement
市场
of
建
low
设
carbon
扎实推
development
进，
systems and
各
mechanisms,
具特色
solid progress in the
地方
construction
低碳
of a
发展
national
模式
carbon market,
逐步显现，
region-specific low carbon
适应气
development
候变化
models,
能力不
stronger
断提高，
adaptation ability,
全社会
and
绿
higher
色低碳意
awareness
识
for green
明
and
显
low
增强。
carbon development.
同时，
At the same
中
time,
国政府
the
积
Chinese
极
government
建设
actively
性
and
参与
constructively
全球气候治理，
participates in global
坚持
climate
多边主
governance.
义，
We adhere to the
共同担
principles
有
of
区别的责任
multilateralism and
等原
common
则，
but differentiated
高度重
responsibilities,
视应对气候
attach
变
great
化国际
importance
合
to
作，
international
积
cooperation
极
in
参与
addressing climate
气候
change,
变化国际谈判，
actively participate in
深入开
international
展气候变化
negotiations on
南南
climate
合作，
change, deepen
推
South-South
动达成
cooperation on
和
climate
加快
change,
落实巴
promote
黎
the
协定，
conclusion and speed
以
up
中国理
implementation of the Paris Agreement shape a new pattern of global climate governance with China vision and China practice, and gradually become an important participant, contributor, and leader in the development of global ecological civilization. In 2020, President Xi Jinping made a major announcement of carbon peaking and carbon neutrality, demonstrating China's firm determination to take the path of green and low-carbon development and join hands with the international community to tackle climate change. This is a major strategic decision made by the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at the core, coordinating the overall domestic and international situations and after careful consideration. In the next step, we will resolutely implement relevant decisions and arrangements and continue to promote new progress in addressing climate change. The UNFCCC COP26 will be held in Glasgow, the UK. COP26 will complete the negotiation on the remaining issues of the implementation rules of the Paris Agreement, and global climate governance will enter a new era as it continues to embark on a new journey of building a modern socialist country in an all-round way, entering a critical period of comprehensive green transformation of economic and social development. At such a period, the release of this white paper is crucial to enhance domestic and international understanding of China's climate action and share Chinese wisdom and solutions. Responding to climate change is a common cause of mankind. China will continue to implement the national strategy to actively respond to climate change, incorporate carbon peaking and carbon neutrality into the overall layout of ecological civilization development, make every effort to tackle climate change under the new situation, and will work with the international community to promote the comprehensive, balanced, and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement and jointly build a fair, reasonable, cooperative, and win-win global climate governance system and start a new journey of global response to climate change. These are the opening remarks, and now my colleague, Director General Sun, and I would be happy to take your questions. Well, thank you, Minister Ye. Now the floor is open for questions. Please identify yourselves before asking the question.
谢谢，我是中央广播电视总台央视记者。
Thank you.
我的问题是呢，
With
今天发
CCTV,
布的
my
这个应对
question
气候变化
is,
白皮
for
书，
the white
它
paper
跟以往
that is
相
to
比
be
有什
released
么不同？
today,
另外一个问题就是
how is it
我国
different
目前
from
的
the
应对气候变化
previous
您认
white
为
paper?
最大的机遇是
And
什
what
么？
are
另外
the
面临的挑
greatest
战有什么？
opportunities
谢
and
谢。
challenges for China's response to climate change?
好，谢谢你的提问。
Thank you for your question.
关于白皮书，
On the white
刚才
paper,
也跟大家通报了，2011年国新办
in
就发布了
2011,
中国
the
应对气候变化的
SCIO
政策
issued the white paper of
2011
China's
白皮书
policies and actions on climate change
此后
2011.
2012年至2020
Between
年，我
2012
们
and
每年发布
2020, we have
中国应对气候
released
变化的
the
政策
annual
与行动
report of
年度
China's
报告，
policies and actions for
持续
addressing
向社会
climate
各界
change every year
通报我国
to
应对
introduce
气候变化的
China's
进展
progress
和
and
成效。
achievements in addressing climate change.
那么党的18大以来，
Since the 18th
以习
Party
近平同志为核
Congress,
心
the
的党
CPC
中央
Central Committee
高
with
度重
Comrade
视
Xi
气
Jinping
候
at
变
its
化工作，
core, has
实
attached
施
great
积极应对
importance
气候变化
to
国家
addressing
战略，
climate change
应对
and
气候变化
implemented
工作
an active
从
national
认识、
policy to
理念
address climate
到实
change.
践，
There has
都
been
发生了历史
historical,
性、转折
transitional,
性、
and
全
profound
局性的变
changes
化，
in the
取
approaches
得
and
了举世
practice
瞩目的
of
成就。
China's efforts to fight climate
此次
change.
发布的白皮书
And remarkable
系
achievements
统
have
阐
been
述了
made.
习近平总书
This
记
white paper gave
关于
a
我国
full
应对气候变
picture
化的
of
新理念、
General
新思想、
Secretary Xi
新战略。
Jinping's
全
new
面概述
approaches and strategies
党的18
on
大以来，
China's efforts
特别
against
是
climate
13五期
change,
间，我国所采
elaborated
取的
on
应对气候
China's
变化
policy
政策措
measures
施
and
和
achievements
成
on
效，
addressing climate change
系统梳理
since the 18th
应对
Party
气候变
Congress,
化的中国路
particularly
径
during the
与方
13th
案，
five-year plan period,
充分
and
体
gave a
现我国
systematic
对
review
应对气
of
候变
China's
化
approaches
做
and
出的
plan for
重大贡
addressing
献
climate change.
和付
It
出的
speaks
巨大努
volume
力，
about China's important contribution
展示了我
to and
国
great
主
efforts
动承
for
担
addressing climate change,
应对气候
and
变化的
shows
国际
China's
责任，
commitment to
推
its
动构建人类
international
共同体的责任
responsibility of
担当。
addressing climate change and to building
同
a
时呢，
community with a
这次
shared
发布的
future
白
for
皮书
mankind.
重申了
This white
中
paper
国对
also
全球气候
reiterates
治理的立场
China's
主张，
position on the
对国
global
际社会发出
climate
倡议
governance,
和呼吁，
calling on the
推动实
international
践共
community
建
to
公平合
build
理、
a fair,
合作共赢的
reasonable,
全球
and
治理
win-win
体系。
global governance system.
关于机遇和挑战，
As for the opportunities and challenges,
绿色低碳发展
Green and low-carbon development represents the trend of the world, as well as new economic growth drivers and development opportunities. The CPC Central Committee has adopted a long-term approach and taken targeted measures. It has seized strategic opportunities and formulated mid- and long-term targets and visions for addressing climate change. It has seen addressing climate change as an important tool for promoting high-quality development and high-level protection of the environment. It shows China's commitment to its international responsibility on addressing climate change and to building a community with a shared future for mankind. In recent years, China has taken a series of effective policy measures, adjusted the industrial structure, improved the energy mix, increased energy efficiency, and forest carbon storage, and strengthened adaptation capacity, and made remarkable achievements. By the end of 2020, the carbon dioxide emission per unit of GDP of China was reduced by 48.4% compared with 2005, outperforming the committed target of 40 to 45%. The top-level design has been improved, market mechanisms being advanced, and public awareness been raised, and sustained progress has been made in addressing climate change. Having said that, China is also faced with difficulties and challenges in addressing climate change. The world is facing unprecedented changes unseen in a century. Unilateralism and protectionism are on the rise, and China is facing a more challenging international situation in addressing climate change. China plans to use about 30 years to achieve carbon neutrality from carbon peak, much shorter than major developed countries. Thus, China is faced with more challenging task of energy and industrial transition. China is the world's largest developing country. It is faced with multiple challenges, including economic development, improving people's lives, controlling pollution, and upholding energy security, on top of our unbalanced and inadequate development. The understanding, policy tools, approaches and measures, and basic capacity of China in addressing climate change still have some weak links. But under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee, we have the confidence and capability to achieve the task of carbon neutrality and carbon peak. Moving forward, we will be based on a new development stage, follow through on a new development philosophy, foster a new development paradigm, adopt a systemic approach, and strike balance between development and emission reduction, the overall picture in different parts, and short-term and mid- and long-term, include carbon peak and neutrality into the building of an ecological civilization. We will be committed to a green and high-quality path of development, prioritizing ecological conservation, committed to implementing an active national strategy of addressing climate change to achieve the goal of carbon peak and neutrality and contribute to addressing climate change. Thank you. Next question, please.
右边第二排。
感谢主持人。总台央广记者提问，我的问题是：那么中方对于 COP26 解决巴黎协定第6条实施细则的历史遗留问题是否持一个乐观的态度，将做出具体的努力？谢谢。
Solving the Article 6 of Paris Agreement at COP26 and what efforts will be made?
谢谢，谢谢叶部长。
Well, thank you,
感谢
Minister Ye, and thank you for your question.
COP26啊，这个首要任务呢
The primary task of COP26 is to complete the negotiation of the rulebook of Paris Agreement, particularly on the remaining issues of Article 6 concerning the market system. This is the precondition for parties to fully and effectively implementing the Paris Agreement and an important sign for ensure the international community's trust in multilateral system, particularly the business community. We hope that parties will work toward the same goal.
积极建设性
Developed countries need to act in a constructive and flexible manner,
遵循共同但有区别的责任的原
follow the
则，
principle of common but differentiated
国别目标
responsibilities,
和政策的国家自主决定的属性，
stick to the nature of nationally determined,
原则达成一致的问
and
题上再出
avoid
现一
any
场倒退，
retrogressive position
重开
or
谈
even
判。
renegotiation on issues that already
关键
have
问题，
principled
第一个呢，
consensus.
希望
There are some key issues.
这
First,
个市场机制呀，要为发展中国家适应的
the
气候变化
market
行动提
system
供
needs to
资金
provide
支持，
founding support for adaptation of
适应气候变化是发展中
developing
国家
countries.
高度关注的问题。目前发达
Adaptation
国家提供的资金呢，
is high on the
已经
agenda
能
of
满足
developing
发展中
countries,
国家的
and
适应的需求
the。 fund provided by
中
developed
方的支
countries
持
is far
为发
from
展中
being
国家
enough.
适应气候变化提供
China
稳定
supports
可
the
预期的
provision of stable and
适应资金支持。
predictable adaptation funds for developing countries. Particularly, we
发达
hope
国家展
that
现积极建
developed
设性的态
countries
度，
can be
各方呢
active
共
and
同找
constructive,
到
and parties can
合理
work
的解决
together
方案。
to find a reasonable
第二个问
solution.
题呢是关于
And second,
这个市场机制的减排指标与国家自主贡献
on
之间的
the
关系问题。
the relationship between the emission reduction goals of market
缔约
system
方
and
因
the
为
NDC.
转让
Parties
来
shall
自
not
于国
be
家自主贡献
asked
范
to
围之外的
adjust
减排指
their
标，而对
NDC
它的国家自主贡献的排
targets
放进行调整。
because of the transfer of emission
但
targets
同
out
时
of
呢，
their
中方也理
NDCs.
解有一些
But
缔约方
China
呢对这一
also
项
understands
规
that
定可
some
能
parties
有些担忧，
might
因
be
此愿意考虑
concerned about
结合
this.
这个国家自主贡献
So
覆盖的范围
maybe
因素呢，
considering factors such as the time frame of the NDC, there can be a certain time
这
frame,
个市场机制的时候呢，对它的
and
国家自主贡献的范围啊，
parties can be
覆盖范围
asked
啊，
to
给予
clarify what their
第
NDCs
三个
cover
这个
before
关键点
participating
呢是
in
关于2020
market
年
system
前的
cooperation.
减排指
And
标，
third,
如何过渡。
the transition of the pre-2020 emission reduction targets.
工商界参与
We hope that
巴黎协定下的市场机
we
制
can
活动
ensure
信息和积极性，
the
应该允
confidence
许
and
缔约
active
方使用
participation of
2020年
private
前的
sector in
合理
market
减排量
activities
完
under
成
the
它的
Paris Agreement,
国家自主贡献目
so
标。
parties shall be allowed to use
参与
their pre-2020 CER to complete
市场的
their
交易
NDC and participate
为
in
此的话，我们
market
也愿意探
transactions.
讨
And we are
一
willing
些妥协的方案。
to discuss
中方
some
愿意
compromised approaches.
COP26 的主席国
China
中国一
will
道，
work with
坚持
the
公开透
UK,
明、
the
广泛参与，
COP26
缔约方
president,
驱动、协商
follow
一致
the
这些
rules of
多边议事规
openness,
则，
inclusiveness,
密切的沟通协
transparency,
调，
parties-driven
推
and
动
consensus
本次大
building.
会完成这项
Step up
以及
communication
整个
coordination so
巴黎
that
协定实施细则的
COP26
谈判。
can complete the negotiations of the rules book. Thank
好，
you.
请大家继续提问。
Next question, please.
中间第二排这位男士。
谢谢主持人，人民日报记者提问。
With People's
叶部长
Daily,
您好，我想问一下，就是咱们国家现在就是应对
Minister
气候
Ye,
变化
I
工
want
作
to
的
ask
总体进
about
展如何？
the
有哪些
progress
成效
made
对下一步工作有哪些考虑呢
in？
谢谢。
China's efforts to fight climate change, and what more will be done.
谢谢你的提问。我国呢高度重视气候变化工作，
Thank you for the
将
question.
应对气候变
China
化
attaches great
作为
importance to
生
addressing
态文
climate
建设
change.
的重要抓手。
In regards,
近
climate
年来，我
responsiveness
国实
is
施
an
积极应
important
对气候
part
变化的国家战略
for，ecological
采取调
civilization.
整产
In
业
recent
结构，
years,
优化
China
能
has
源结构，
implemented a national
节约
strategy on climate
能源，
change
提高能
to
效，建立市场机制，增加
adjust
三中全会
industrial
一系列的政
structure,
策措施，
optimize energy
各项工作
structure, save energy, and
取得了
improve
积极的进展。
efficiency. Positive
主要体
progress
现
has
在
been
降解
made
方
in
面。
various areas.
一是
First,
温室气体排放得到了有效的
greenhouse
控制。
gas emissions have been
2020
effectively
年，
put under control. In
中国碳排放
2020,
强度比
China's
2015
carbon
年
emission
降低
intensity
了
reduced by
18.8%，
18.8%
比
compared
2005
to
年降低了
2015 and
48.4%，
48.4% lower
超
than
过了将国际消费
2005,
承诺的
exceeding
40%
the
到
40 to
45%
45% goal promised
那
to
么
the
基本扭
international
转了
community,
二氧化碳
and basically
排放
reversing the
快速增
rapid
长的
growth
这样
of
一个局面。
CO2 emissions.
二是能源结构优化
Second,
取得了
the
成效。
optimization of the energy
2020
structure
年
has
我
achieved
国非化
results.
石能源
In
占能
2020,
源消
China's
费
non-fossil
比重
fuel energy
15.9%
accounted for 15.9%
比
of energy
2005
consumption,
年提升了8.5%。
an increase of 8.5 percentage points from 2005. Reliance on coal consumption has dropped significantly, and energy structure optimization has achieved significant results. Third, the continuous improvement of the national carbon market. On July 16, 2021, the National Carbon Emissions Trading Market officially launched and started trading. The first compliance cycle of the market included 2,162 key emission units in the power generation industry, covering more than 4.5 billion tons of carbon emissions each year, making it the world's largest carbon market covering greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, China's low-carbon pilot demonstration work has continued to advance. The ability to adapt to climate change has been continuously improved, and the low-carbon awareness of the general public has also been continuously improved. While doing a good job of domestic response to climate change, we are also actively participating in global climate governance. China has played a historic role in promoting the conclusion and entry into force of the Paris Agreement and the formulation of the implementation guidelines. We actively carry out South-South cooperation in addressing climate change to help other developing countries, especially the least developing countries, African countries, and small island countries, to increase the capacity to address climate change. In 2020, President Xi Jinping made a major announcement of carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. The CPC Central Committee made important arrangements for carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. Opinions of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council on the complete, accurate, and comprehensive implementation of the new development concept and achieving carbon peaking and carbon neutrality have just been released recently, and the 1+N policy framework is being formed at a faster pace. In the next step, we will continue to implement the decisions and deployments of the CPC Central Committee and State Council. First, we will actively implement climate goals in the 14th Five-Year Plan and break down the 18% binding target into regions with stronger supervision. Second is to promote the implementation of the carbon peaking action and promote the implementation of a 1+N policy system and advance the development of green low-carbon circular development. Third is to step up preparation and promulgation of the implementation plan for pollution reduction and carbon reduction synergy. Fourth, continue to improve the national carbon market and work with relevant departments to roll out the provisional regulation on carbon trading as quickly as possible and gradually expand the market coverage to more high-emission industries based on the sound operation of the market in the power generation industry. Fifth is to strengthen the construction of relevant systems and mechanisms to control carbon intensity and carbon emission and implement long-term mechanisms for the statistics and the management of greenhouse gas statistics. Sixth is to coordinate efforts to address climate change and ecological environmental protection. The seventh is to improve public awareness for low carbon and green development. Eighth is to formulate the National Climate Strategy 2035 and strengthen monitoring and assessment. And ninth is to continue to take an active part in international negotiations on climate and continue to expand South-South cooperation on climate change. Thank you. Next question.
谢谢。封面新闻记者提问。习总书记曾经说
With the cover news, President Xi Jinping used to say that addressing climate change is something we do on our own, not something we are asked to do. So my question is, what is the significance of climate change to China's economic and social development? President Xi stressed at multiple occasions that responding to climate change is not something we are asked to do, but something we do on our own initiative. It is what China's development requires. It is also what we need to do to build a community with a shared future for mankind. China's economy is shifting toward a period of high-quality development. Addressing climate change is an important tool for us to advance high-quality development. By advancing green, low-carbon circular development and building a low-carbon energy structure and advocate a low-carbon lifestyle, and adjust the structures of energy, transport, and other industries, these efforts will continue to inject new impetus to economic development. Climate response is also an important part of environmental protection and ecological protection, and it forms strong synergy with environmental protection. It can improve the environment from the source and raise the efficiency of environmental protection and lower the cost of environmental protection. Climate response is also China's contribution to the building of a community with a shared future for mankind. China upholds multilateralism and principles including common but differentiated responsibility. China actively shapes and leads global climate governance and works for the comprehensive, balanced, and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. China advocates for the interests of developing countries and works to shape the global climate governance system towards a fairer, more rational, and more win-win direction, and work for the building of a community with a shared future for mankind. To do a good job in climate change would also go a long way towards implementing the new development paradigm and advancing the new path of high-quality development. This is a challenge, but also, more importantly, an opportunity. For China, the world's biggest developing country, its development still remains unbalanced and inadequate, and we face a series of heavy tasks of addressing environmental pollution and other issues. That means we need to be realistic when we are working to achieve carbon peaking and carbon neutrality, and base our efforts on China's national conditions and take coordinated efforts to make arrangements on a science-based and steady manner. At the same time, we are clearly aware that we need to take all sorts of measures, tap the potential of new forms of businesses and new industries, and that is an important driving force for high-quality development, and this will create new drivers of green and low-carbon growth and contribute to economic transformation. Thank you.
好，下一个问题。
Next
这边
question.
这位外国记者。
Thank you. Tom Cheshire, Sky News. China burns more coal than the rest of the world combined. It's still adding to that coal power, and in the document released yesterday, you said you'll only gradually reduce that at the same time as you're asking other countries to drastically reduce their emissions. How long will that peak of coal use last, and why is apparently China prioritizing short-term economic growth over the future of the planet? And secondly, we've heard about the leadership of President Xi Jinping. Will he be attending COP26? And if not, why not? Thank you.
请翻译一下问题。
英国天空新闻频道记者：中国的煤炭消耗量是世界其他国家的总和还要多。中国依然在持续的发展煤电产业。在今天的白皮书当中提到了中国将逐渐削减煤炭的使用和消费。那么我的问题是，在与此同时，中国却在要求其他的国家减少煤炭的使用和减少碳排放。中国的煤炭使用什么时候能够达到峰值？中国是否愿意为了星球的未来牺牲一些短期的利益？第二个问题是，习近平主席是否会出席第26次缔约方大会？如果是或者不是的话，会是什么原因？谢谢。
谢谢。习近平主席是否参加 那个 COP26大会啊。
Regarding whether President Xi Jinping will be attending COP26, the Foreign Ministry will be responsible for giving you an answer. On your question about coal consumption and coal development, this is something that people are watching very closely. And Director General Sun will be answering your question. Thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question.
关于这个，我想主要是关注这个近期的一些情况啊，也同时也提到。
My answer will be focusing on what has been happening recently, as well as the relations between short-term and long-term efforts. I will try to be concise in my answer.
能源呢是经济社会发展和我们这个群众生活
Energy is
基础的保障
a basic guarantee and precondition for economic and social development and people's lives.
文明进步的
It is also a driving force for the advancement of human civilization.
对未来来说的话呢，实现经济社会可持续发展的这个能源领域的清洁低碳发展是尤为紧迫的。
And also, there's an urgent need for us to realize clean and low carbon development. In recent years, China has been making enormous efforts to adjust energy structure and optimization of the energy structure. And we are shifting from the heavy reliance on coal, and our energy consumption is becoming more diverse. In 2020, China's coal consumption accounted for 56.8%, down from 72.4% in 2005. And non-fossil fuel accounted for 15.9%. And China's renewable energy is growing rapidly. China's non-fossil fuel power accounted for 98 million kilowatt, which is number one in the world for 6 years in a row. By 2030, non-fossil fuel will account for 25% of primary energy consumption, and we will be installing 1.2 billion kilowatts of wind power and solar power. President Xi further announced that we will support developing countries' low carbon energy development and will not build build coal power generation projects abroad. China will continue to control the consumption of coal and redouble efforts on developing renewable energies and build a new power system that relies on renewable energy. And China is also the world's biggest manufacturer of clean energy equipment. We will advance international cooperation on that and help developing countries to shift towards clean and low carbon energy structure at a faster pace. China, as a developing country, faces multiple tasks of improving people's livelihood, growing the economy, and eradicating poverty. And we face many realistic challenges that cannot be addressed overnight. We need to be systematic and holistic and be prepared for all risks and ensure the security of energy supply chains and guarantee people's lives so as to respond to the risks that could arise in realizing green transformation. Thank you. Next question.
中间第三排。
谢谢。凤凰卫视的记者，我们想请问中国打算采取什么措施来加强应对气候变化的履约和透明度的建设？谢谢。
Enhance its capacity of honoring commitment and increase transparency in addressing climate change.
主要想请问一下，中国准备采取什么措施来加强
China will
应对气候
do
变
to
化
strengthen
履约
its
和透明度建设？
capacity to honor its commitment and increase transparency in responding to climate change. I'll give the floor to Director General Sun.
感谢记者朋友提问。
Thank you for your question.
关于这个话题呢，还是要从公约说起。
Let me start with the convention.
全球共同应对气候变化应该建立在全
Global efforts against climate change must be based on unity and cooperation of all countries.
这个关于各方要提交国家润湿气体清单，要加强透明度建设的这些规定。
The convention have asked countries to submit its list of emission reductions and other materials. This is very important for the implementation of the convention. And the Paris Agreement has laid out more specific requirements so that countries will take more effective and transparent measures against climate change. On transparency, the Convention also grants developing countries a certain degree of flexibility and asks developed countries to provide funding and capacity building support. China, as the world's largest developing country, has seen its climate action transparency drawn a lot of attention. So far, China has submitted 3 reports of its national information and 2 updated reports. That means the list for 5 years. These lists are credible and science-based. They are recognized by the international community. The counting system of greenhouse gas is the foundation for formulating these lists. Through years of efforts, we have put in place a basic accounting system covering different mechanisms. As for businesses, we have released about over 20 methods and guidelines for the statistical work. At the leading office of carbon peak and carbon neutrality, China has recently set up a working group on statistics. China will further improve such system, strengthen our capacity, and ensure that this counting system can meet the new requirements of the Paris Agreement, and see that China will make even fresher progress in the governance capacity in responding to climate change.
谢谢深圳卫视记者提问，然后也是一个关于
TV.
的问题。
It's also about
想请问一下，
COP26.
中方对此次大会总体上有何期待呢？谢谢。
What does China expect from this COP26?
COP26 呢是巴黎协定
Thank you.
进入实施阶段
COP26
之后召开的首次缔约方大会
is the first conference of parties after the Paris Agreement. China advocates that this conference should first send a message of upholding multilateralism and multilateral rules.
各方要落实
All parties need to implement the UNFCCC
确立的共同但有区别的责
and
任等原
the
则
Paris Agreement and principles including common but differentiated responsibilities, as well as the system of nationally determined contributions. On the basis of respecting
为应对
countries'
全球气候变化
conditions,
做出贡献。
all countries need to contribute to global response to climate change. China
在本次大会就
stands ready to work with all parties
取得进展。
to make progress in the following major areas.
一是
First,
完成巴黎协定实施细则的
completing
谈判。
the negotiations of the
巴黎
Paris
协定
Rulebook.
已达成近6年，
It has been 6 years since the Paris Agreement was reached, but we are yet to finish the negotiations on the implementation guidelines,
那么国际社会
including Article 6, the international community have full high hopes for the guidelines to be completed. The conference should work actively to conclude the negotiations on Article 6, which is a foundation and prerequisite for the full and effective implementation of the agreement, as well as an important indicator for the global community's trust in the agreement. Second, developing countries have long been concerned about financial support, technological support, and capacity building support. There should be progress at this conference. Previously, developing countries technology and financial issues have long felt disappointed about developing countries' efforts. And people have misgivings about developed countries trying to shift blame in emission reduction over to developing countries. In the course of implementation of Paris Agreement, these issues concern political trust as well as the efforts of developing countries to address climate change. The conference should make arrangements and fully advance ambitions on support, mitigation, and adaptation. Third, we need to highlight implementation. We need to advocate all parties to implement the goals and turn the goals into specific policies and measures, and avoid making the proposal of goals into empty slogans. For example, developed countries must fill in the gap of $100 billion every year. This is a major issue concerning the trust between developed and developing countries. Various developed countries, without honoring their commitments, continue to raise their climate goals. For that, parties need to realize that goals that do not focus on real actions are empty slogans. Only by honoring Paris Agreement's goals and targets can we address the climate crisis and climate challenges. If there's no more question, this will be the end of the press conference. Thank you, spokespersons, and thank you all for coming.